So having a big, large, blocky palette with some big, blocky buildings is what gives Minecraft its signature aesthetic. However, in the world of modded, we tend to go a little bit further, and sometimes we want a little bit more detail. And that is where today's mod comes in, the lovely Chisels and Bits mod, and it turns big blocks like these into little bits like these. Now this comes in extremely useful when we're trying to look at a map of all of the guides we're going to be doing. And that map needs to resemble the house that we've built with all 9 different guides in, each one with a specific room. You get extra points from me if you know where this house is from. But let's dive into Chisel and Bits and see all of the cool stuff that you can do with it and exactly what this mod is about. So in order to start Chisel and Bits, you're going to need to make yourself a chisel, and these are really easy to make. The only thing you're going to need for the first 4 tiers of chisels is just a stick and then whatever material you're making the chisel out of. So stone just requires some sort of stone, then you've got iron, gold and diamonds. Now it gets a little bit different when you're looking at netherite because you need a blaze rod as well as a netherite ingot, but other than that it is fairly straightforward. Now the only thing that you need to concern yourself with when making a chisel is the higher the tier of the chisel, the more durability it has, with the exception of the gold tool, but I think we all know how gold tools work by now. So now that you've got your chisel, all you want to do is start chiseling away at whatever block you want the bits from. So I'm doing this on red concrete and it's giving me red concrete bits that I can then place down elsewhere and I can start building out of them. Nice and straightforward. Now it is worth noting that as soon as you take a single bit away from a block, then that block itself is going to become a Chisel and Bits block. So if we have a look at our red concrete block here, we have taken some bits out of it. So now if we break it, it's actually still going to have those little bits missing from it, which is really good if you're making some sort of sculpture. If you want to turn this back into a normal concrete block, you just need to fill in the bits that you have taken from it, and then it just goes back to being red concrete, which we can then break, pick up, and then place down again. Absolutely no problems at all. Now you might be thinking, hell, if I have to break down each block bit by bit, I'm going to go absolutely insane and I'm never going to get anything built. And you would be correct, which is why chisels have different modes in them. If you open up the radio menu, which is default R on your keyboard, then you will see that there are a bunch of different menus and sub-menus that you can use, and each one has a different purpose. The one that we've been using so far is the cube single bit, which allows you to just take each individual bit. What you can do though is take much larger bits, such as small, which does essentially a 4x4. There's medium that does an 8x8, and there's a large which essentially does 1/8 of an entire block for you. Now another really cool mode that the chisels have is the sphere mode. So if you have a look, you can see that it is highlighting a sphere that we can cut out, and the red is going to show you where that sphere interacts with the side of the block. So we could theoretically put a block there, and it has cut out a lovely sphere here. Obviously, we've not done that very well. You'd obviously do it a little bit better if you were actually building something. The great thing with this, though, is that you can use the bits to create spheres. So if we go for a half block sphere here and just paste it in, we now have a half block sphere. It looks a little bit janky, but you can always refine it using a chisel and just selecting the single bits and maybe remove these side ones. And there you go, you have a cool sphere. Honestly, you won't really use this very often, but it is really cool. So if you want to build something with it, then absolutely build it and post it in our Discord. In fact, any Chisel and Bits stuff that you manage to make, look at the link in the description down below and post it in our Discord channel, because it's going to be absolutely awesome to see the stuff that you guys can build with this mod. Now, moving on from the spheres and cubes, you have the planes and extrusions. Now, the planes are really cool. All you basically do is take off one layer of the block at a time, and then if you do this side, you're taking off this one side here. And this is really good for creating pillars and things like that that require it to be a certain portion of the block. And then you can take off more and more if you're using the extrusion with, let's say, 4x4. You can just take off a big chunk at a time. Fairly self-explanatory, but it is super cool. Now, if you're wanting a little bit more control of this, you can go and use the drawn section. So you can draw a cube, and that will allow you to just make a cube of any size. If you do it on one face, it'll do it like a plane, but if you do it across multiple, then you'll see it makes whatever cube or cuboid that you want, and you can just take these out nice and easily. Now, if you want to do things a little bit more sort of detailed, then you can also use the line tool on here, and you can draw a line across or a line down, that sort of thing, and you can even do diagonal lines to make things nice and cool and really, really detailed. This basically just saves you a bunch of time if you're wanting to take out a single line or if you're wanting to do things on the diagonal, because that makes things much, much easier than doing it all bit by bit. Now, connected plane we will get onto later on because there's some other things that you need to be aware of before we go into that, but we also have plane and line here as well. They work very similar to the other ones. The line one is my absolute favorite though, because you could quite easily just start taking out little lines across here, and you'll see that you can basically see all the way through to the bottom of the block, and it won't affect any of the blocks beneath it. Really, really cool, and honestly, you will use this one constantly if you're doing any sort of building in Chisel and Bits. And the same applies with this one as well. You can do 2x2 lines if you're wanting to make a nice big hole, or you can do it 1x1 to make it nice and small, or even take off like a quarter of the block at a time if you wanted to make some sort of massive structure. So those are the basic functions of the chisel, and you will find that the bits do the exact same thing but in reverse. So for example, if you go extrude 2x2 using the bits, you can then just place down little slabs like that nice and easily, and then if you've got your chisel, you can just remove them like that. Now, learning all of the different modes for the bits and for the chisels is probably the hardest part of getting started in Chisel and Bits. If you don't know what you're doing, then you'll find that you're doing something in a very long way that could be done in a nice and easy way. But now let's go through some of the more advanced things, starting with the bane of my existence, storage. So the first item that will help with storage is the chiseled bit bag. Now these are pretty easy to make. You just need wool and one bit, so you should be able to get that really early on. And what this bag does is it basically auto stores your bits for you. So if we start breaking down this purple bit block, then you will see we're not getting a bunch of them in our inventory. Instead, when we open the chisel bit bag, you can see that they stack up to 512 in each slot. You can condense and combine them. For example, if you've got a bunch like that, you can then just go like that and it will filter it all out for you. And it also has a filter mode where you can delete only the purple concrete bits by taking a stack and clicking on those, and that will allow you to more easily filter out the bag once you've got a bunch of bits in it. Now, the other really cool thing that you can do with the bit bag is you can start placing blocks down and it will auto-fill your hotbar up to 64, just like the Danks mod used to as well, and you can then just keep spamming this out and you don't need to constantly be going in the bit bag in order to get the bits out. Now, of course, you actually need to have the bits in your bit bag to be able to do that, but it is a very handy tool to use and becomes very useful when you're building things. Now, the other storage option that you've got is one of these chiseled bit storages. Now, these are a little bit more expensive to make. They require a bit of iron, some glass, and a chisel in order to make just a single one of these. Now, there's a few cool things that you can do with this, which you can't do with the normal chisel bag. First up, if you've just got a full-size block, such as this birch wood, and you just put it into the storage, that's going to immediately break it down into bits for you, and you can just take them out one stack at a time. Now, the great thing about this is that your chisel bit bag and your bit storage can also interact with each other. So if you've got a bunch of matching blocks in your bit bag, you can just right-click and dump them all in there. And then if we put some purple concrete in here, we can just go boom, and then it will fill out the concrete as well. So you can basically make a storage system using just all of these on a big wall, and then that will allow you to more easily take and replace the bits. It is incredibly cool, makes a nice aesthetic, and it means that you don't have to carry about 50 of these bags around with you if you do want to be doing lots of different materials. So we've had a look at the chisels and the modes of the chisels, and we've also had a look at the basic storage, but let's look at some of the other tools such as has the monocle, the tape measure, and the magnifying glass that are going to help you with building your structures. First up, let's talk about the magnifying glass, because that is the most easy one to explain. All it does is it checks the compatibility of the blocks that you're looking at with Chisel and Bits. Now, this becomes extremely useful if you're running a lot of mods like we are. Let's take the floor for example. We can turn these into little bits. As you can see, it says chiseling is supported, and our magnifying glass will allow us to do that, even though it is just from the chipped mod. However, these stairs are made of sunny quartz, which you get from Britannia, and that will not allow us to break these down into bits. And if we try to, you'll see it just does not work. The magnifying glass is actually super useful if you are just wanting to check a little bit of compatibility, especially when you have a bunch of mods in the mod pack like we do on here. But now it's time for the most disappointing tool, which is the monocle. If we equip the monocle, that's not how a monocle should look. It's actually quite disappointing. Now, what the monocle is meant to do is it's meant to allow you to zoom in on the block so that you're able to chisel things out a little bit easier. However, I cannot get this to work at all. I have rebound this key more times than I can even count, and no matter what I do, it just will not work. If any of you guys actually get it to work, then make sure to put it in the comments down below, because I would be very interested to see what happens. However, when it comes to the zoom on it anyway, it is a little bit lackluster, and there's a lot of other zoom mods that actually do a much better job, such as the one I'm using now. It is quite useful, but you can just get another zoom mod and it will do exactly the same thing. So now let's talk about this ridiculously oversized tape measure. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do when you get the tape measure is go to keybinds and find where it says reset measuring tape measurements and keybind that to something that you're not going to forget. Trust me, this is going to save you a massive headache. Now, the tape measure has 3 modes: distance, bit, and block. So if we select distance and just go for a red, we can go from here to say here, and you'll see it is 7.27 meters across. Now, if we use the same color again, it will get rid of the first one and allow us to just make a new line of that color. If you want to keep this, but also want to do another line, you could just change the color. So if we select blue, we can then go from here to here, and then you can do exactly the same with, say, gray, and you'll see that we've got 3 different measurements. And now that you've got all of these, you want to do your reset button, and it gets rid of them all, so you don't have a million different things all popping up on your screen at once. This can be thought of as a little bit of a replacement to the wool blockchains that we all use to measure out our buildings. Even this house that we built here has been measured using all of the wool blocks, and from now on I'll just be using the tape measure because it is a much easier method. Now, if you want to get a little bit more detailed, then you can go for the bit measurements. So for example, if we want to measure from this point here all the way across here, you'll see that it is 16 bits because it is the entire block. But if we want to exclude this one, we can do it from there to there, and that will tell you it is 15 bits, so just shy of a block. Really good if you're taking very specific measurements, say if you wanted to do that, and then you also wanted to know what the distance is from, say, here to here, then you can see them from a good distance as well, which really helps out with measuring. And then the final one is blocks, which pretty much does what it says on the tin. It measures the amount of blocks from one space to another. If you want to know the distance between this block and this block, there you go, it's 7 blocks. Nice and easy, nothing too complicated about that, and then just remember to reset all your measurements. It's extremely handy and one of the better tools in Chisel and Bits, so I would definitely recommend getting used to using this because it will help you out quite a lot. So those are the basic tools. Now we're going to move on to a few of the slightly more complicated tools, specifically the schematics. Yes, I know they're technically called patterns, but I've played too much Create to not call them schematics. Now, in order to make a pattern, you're going to need a quill, and you just make that using a feather, a black die, and a yellow die. And all you need to do is find a Chisel and Bits block that you want to make the pattern of, use the paper in your offhand and the quill in your main hand, hold down right click and you will make yourself a pattern that will allow you to place the block. Now, if you've been paying attention, you will know what comes next: placement modes. So your first option is placement. So that one is very straightforward. You just place the block, nice and easy. Now, it's worth noting that if you are in survival, for example, you will need the bits and you will only be able to use this pattern once. So just make sure that you know what you're doing before you place that first one. So now your next option is removal. Now, what you need for removal is you need something to be a full block, such as this, and then you can just right click and remove whatever your schematic is from that full block, leaving basically the opposite in the actual block's place. This one is pretty good if you're wanting to, say, emboss a pattern across a border of something, and that will do it very, very quickly for you. The next one is basically the same except for chisel and bits blocks, and that is carving. So carving won't do anything on a normal block, but if you put it in a chisel and bits block, it will then carve out that piece from there. So you can think of those as basically the same thing, just one's for chisel and bits blocks and one's for normal blocks. The next one is a lot of fun. Now, this one is called merge, and it basically just takes two chisel and bits blocks and merges them together. So as you can see, this is now yellow and the blue there, and you could do the same with the orange, for example, and you'll see that it has just replaced those blocks with this and also filled in any empty spaces that would have been done by this schematic. So this is pretty cool if you're making some sort of fusion style block. I really like this. There's a lot of cool things that you can do with it. And then the last one is imposement, which basically does the same thing, but for full blocks. So you can't see it very well here, but if we go over to this one, you can see it's basically merged the full block with the chisel and bits block. So this is also super cool. Now, of course, the thing that you may have noticed is all of these shapes are set in exactly the same direction. And no matter which way you place it from, it will always be set in that direction. But what if I need to flip it round a corner, or if I just want to be facing the other way? Well, that is where our next tool comes in. And that tool is the beautiful modification table. So if we go in here and just put our pattern in, you can see we can now rotate and flip it and all sorts of stuff on here. So if we wanted to, for example, just flip it so it's the other direction, we can mirror over the Z-axis, change that over, and then now it is facing the opposite way. Nice and easy, but be aware that you can only do this with the simple patterns, so those are the white ones. You will not be able to do this with any sealed patterns. So what is the difference between a simple pattern and a sealed pattern, and why would you actually need it? Well, quite simply, a sealed pattern allows you to do something more than once. So if we grab ourselves some sealant, which is just made using honey and slime, hold it in our offhand and then right click on a simple pattern, you will see that it will keep scrubbing and give us a sealed pattern. And now if we take our sealed pattern, we can place it more than once until we run out of bits, and then it just will not let us place it anymore. Side note, I've just realised that this looks like a sofa, and it actually looks quite cool. And then we have this bizarre contraption called a chisel station. Now, I've set up something over here to show you roughly what it does, but you're going to need a sealed pattern of this. So we do it the same way we did before. We get our quill out and we make ourselves a simple pattern, and then with our sealant in the offhand, we can then turn that into a normal sealed pattern. And then that would allow us to just place down all of these blocks. Now, I don't have any of the bits to be able to place it now, but what we do have is the chisel station. Now, if we go into the chisel station, you'll see there are 3 slots. The first one is for your sealed pattern. So we will just put in the sealed pattern that we've got from before. And then we also need a chisel. And what you'll see is that over time, it will just create some lovely copies of the block that you have put in on the schematic. Now, why is this better than just placing it yourself? Well, because of the bit storage next to it. As you can see, what is happening is it's actually pulling the different bits from the storage around here. So we've used a lot of blue. As you can see, we've used a lot of blue. It's used a little bit of yellow, and it's used a little bit of white. And now we can just take these finished ones and just place them as we need to. And it is very, very good for mass producing blocks. And now I can use these to show you a couple of really cool things that's going to make your life so much easier, including the connected plane stuff that we didn't go through earlier. So the first thing that I want to show you is the replace tool, because this will make life so much easier for you. So let's say we have this Chisel and Bits block and we go, you know what, I don't want this blue, I want this background to be red. What we can do is just hold down R, go next, and go to replace. And then if we click on the blue, it will change it to the red concrete. Very nice and simple. Now it's worth noting as well, it changes all of the white concrete on this to red concrete if I click on it, so it's not one that you can use for fine details, but it does work if you're mass replacing walls or things like that. Very, very useful there. The other thing I wanted to show you is the connected planes. So if we go and take a normal plane and say we wanted to take off just this part of this block, if we go and try and do that with the plane, it will take off the entire top section of the block, which is not exactly what we wanted. We can undo that. Control Z undoes, and then Control Y will redo. Just a super useful hint for you. But how would we get rid of just that section? Well, that's where the connected planes come in. You simply select connected plane, and then you use it on there. And then if there is a gap, it will not jump the gap, it will just do that one section. And you can do that multiple times per block. So if we just wanted to get rid of this very middle block, we could just go connected planes there, and that would just get rid of that middle one. And you can do it across all dimensions as well if you wanted to do it like that, for example. And that's how you can do a little bit more in-depth customization with the connected planes. It becomes very useful if you're making something really weirdly shaped. For example, I use the connected planes to make this really cool roof here, and it looks pretty amazing on the lovely front door to our house. So that is basically all the things for Chisel and Bits that you need to know to get started. Now, if you do want to join us on our lovely guide journey going through the rest of the guides on here, make sure to hit subscribe on the channel. There'll be a bunch more guides coming, as well as some interviews with some pretty awesome creators, including the one and only MCC champion Snifferish, who will be here talking to us about Chisel and Bits and content creation. And of course, make sure to join the Discord so you can show off your Chisel and Bits builds. I'd be really interested to see what you can make, and I'm sure the rest of the community will as well. Thanks for watching, everyone. I've been Hellfire Mage, and I will see you next time.